On behalf of our family, we want to thank all of you for the prayers for our beloved.
On a quiet weekend morning in Arizona, according to law enforcement reports, a woman disappeared from her own home. Security cameras reportedly captured activity during the final known moments, as authorities later confirmed. A ransom demand arrived, according to statements released by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And then, in a decision that would change the entire trajectory of the investigation as reported by local media outlets, law enforcement made a call that raised immediate questions across the nation. The homicide unit was brought in. Authorities confirmed publicly. Not search and rescue alone, not just missing persons. Homicide detectives, assigned to what authorities were publicly calling a kidnapping case, according to official statements. That decision, made by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos himself as he told reporters, spoke volumes about what investigators were seeing behind the scenes. Evidence that did not align with a standard abduction, according to investigative sources. Behavior that raised red flags, as law enforcement later stated. And a timeline that, the more closely it was examined by investigators, seemed to suggest something far more complex than a simple ransom kidnapping, according to statements from the Sheriff's Department. This is the investigation into what happened to Nancy Guthrie, mother of NBC Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, as documented through official reports and public statements. And this is why, according to Sheriff Nanos himself, from the very beginning, law enforcement suspected they were dealing with something much darker than the ransom notes suggested. Before we examine what Sheriff Nanos revealed in public statements and why homicide detectives became central to this investigation according to official reports, if you follow cases where evidence tells a different story than initial appearances suggest, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at Unsolved Archive, we examine official statements, documented evidence, and investigative timelines to understand what law enforcement knows and why cases take the turns they do, based on publicly available information and official sources. Because in serious investigations, the decisions made by experienced detectives often reveal more than public statements initially disclose, according to analysis of law enforcement procedures. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, those decisions began raising questions almost immediately, as reported by multiple news outlets. Nancy Guthrie lived in a comfortable home in Pima County, Arizona, according to property records and family statements. She was in her 70s, as confirmed by public information. She required daily medication for medical conditions that demanded consistent treatment, according to statements later released by Sheriff Chris Nanos. She lived alone in a residence equipped with security cameras and an alarm system, as investigators later confirmed. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, is a prominent figure in American media, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, recognized by millions of viewers every morning. That connection would later become relevant to theories about motive and targeting, according to investigative analysis reported by news outlets. But in the early morning hours when events began to unfold, according to the timeline established by investigators, what mattered most was what security systems captured and what they failed to capture. What happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home would be documented by digital timestamps, as authorities later confirmed, but what those timestamps revealed would not match the narrative that a ransom note attempted to establish, according to law enforcement statements. The timeline begins with digital evidence, as reported by investigators. Security camera footage showed activity at the residence, according to law enforcement who reviewed the recordings. According to investigators' statements to media, someone was inside Nancy Guthrie's home for a specific and notably extended period. Not 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, 41 minutes, as the digital timestamps indicated according to official reports. That number became central to the investigation, investigators told reporters, because it raised immediate questions about intent and familiarity. Experienced detectives understand that duration tells a story, according to analysis from law enforcement experts. A burglar wants to get in and get out, as former detectives have explained in media interviews. Speed is essential. Risk increases with every passing moment. But 41 minutes suggests something different, according to investigative analysis. Comfort with the environment, knowledge of security systems, awareness of camera locations, time spent doing something beyond simply grabbing valuables and fleeing. When former DC homicide detective Ted Williams analyzed this timeline publicly in media appearances, his assessment was direct. Spending 41 minutes inside a home is uncharacteristic of a standard burglary, Williams stated in interviews. It suggests the individuals involved were familiar with the residence, its layout, and critically, its security infrastructure, according to his professional assessment. That 41-minute window raised another question that troubled investigators, according to statements from Sheriff Nanos. Nancy Guthrie required daily medication, as authorities confirmed publicly. Those medications were essential for managing serious health conditions, according to the sheriff's statements. They were in the residence, accessible and visible, as investigators later confirmed. Yet, according to law enforcement statements, when Nancy was taken from her home, those medications were left behind. A kidnapper demanding ransom, presumably wanting to keep a victim alive long enough to collect payment, leaves behind the very medication that keeps that victim stable, as investigative analysts noted. The contradiction was stark, according to law enforcement sources. Either the abductors did not understand the medical necessity, which seemed unlikely given the time spent in the residence according to investigators, or the medications were not taken because keeping Nancy Guthrie alive long-term was not part of the plan, as some investigators theorized according to reports. Sheriff Nanos himself addressed this publicly, noting in statements to media that Nancy was in need of medication, daily medication. By the time investigators were making public statements, multiple days had passed. The window for medical complications was closing, as medical experts explained to reporters, and no medication had been provided according to any evidence available to authorities, as Sheriff Nanos confirmed. The security camera situation added another layer, according to investigative analysis. The residence was equipped with cameras designed to capture activity around the property, as authorities confirmed. But according to investigative analysis reported by news outlets, the cameras inside the home were not functioning during the critical period, not broken randomly, not malfunctioning by coincidence, according to investigative sources, inoperable in a way that suggested deliberate action or foreknowledge, as investigators considered according to reports. Detective Williams noted publicly in media interviews that the extended time inside the residence led him to believe that the individuals involved were well aware of the cameras and knew those cameras were inoperable in that home. This knowledge could come from direct experience, Williams explained. Someone who had been inside the residence before, who had access to the property, who understood the security layout according to his analysis. Or it could come from information provided by someone familiar with the home, as investigators considered, a contractor who had worked there, a service provider who had regular access, someone in the social or professional circle who possessed detailed knowledge of security vulnerabilities, according to investigative theories reported by media. Either way, it pointed away from a random abduction and toward a targeted, carefully planned operation, according to law enforcement analysis. Then came the ransom communication, as authorities confirmed. A demand was made, according to official statements. Contact was attempted, as investigators later revealed, but the ransom process itself raised questions, according to law enforcement sources. Experienced kidnapping investigators look for specific patterns in ransom situations, as experts have explained to media: communication methods, payment demands, proof of life protocols, timing of contacts. The behavior in the Nancy Guthrie case did not follow standard patterns that professional kidnappers typically use, according to investigative analysis reported by news outlets. The amount demanded was not publicly disclosed in detail, but the manner of communication and the timing of demands created doubt among investigators about whether this was genuinely a financially motivated abduction or whether the ransom element was staged to misdirect the investigation, according to law enforcement sources quoted in reports. Multiple deadlines passed, as authorities confirmed. Communication became irregular, according to statements, and critically, no credible proof of life was provided in a manner that satisfied investigative standards, as law enforcement told reporters. These factors combined to create significant skepticism among law enforcement about whether they were dealing with a legitimate ransom kidnapping, according to official statements. It was at this point that Sheriff Chris Nanos made the decision that would define the investigative approach, as he explained in public statements. He brought in the Homicide unit, as authorities confirmed publicly, not quietly, not as a precaution kept from public view. Openly and deliberately, criminal investigation specialists were assigned to what was publicly being called a kidnapping case, according to official announcements. Sheriff Nanos explained this decision in terms that were carefully chosen but unmistakably clear, as reporters documented. He stated in press conferences that he gets briefed on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times, on different search and rescue operations. Rarely, he emphasized in his statement, does law enforcement ever call out homicide in missing person cases. But this one, he said publicly, came across with some information that was concerning to him. Information that made him believe the case needed to be approached from two angles simultaneously, as he explained to media. Search and rescue teams would continue their mission, looking for Nancy Guthrie, hoping to locate her alive, according to his statements. But the criminal investigation team needed to start their work because, as Sheriff Nanos put it directly in public remarks, there is something that is not right here. That statement, delivered publicly by the county's top law enforcement official during press conferences, sent a clear message according to media analysis. Investigators were not treating this as a standard kidnapping, as became apparent from official statements. They were treating it as a potential criminal matter involving the most serious outcomes, according to law enforcement sources. The evidence they were seeing, the inconsistencies in the timeline, the behavior of whoever was involved, all pointed toward a conclusion that Nancy Guthrie might not be found alive, according to what investigators told reporters, and more importantly, that her disappearance might not be what it initially appeared to be, as law enforcement suggested in statements. The decision to involve specialized criminal investigators early fundamentally changes an investigation, as law enforcement experts have explained to media. Resources are allocated differently. Evidence is processed with different priorities. Interviews are conducted with enhanced protocols, according to standard investigative procedures. Searches focus not just on rescue, but on comprehensive evidence recovery, as authorities confirmed. And investigative theories shift from hoping for return to determining what happened and who was responsible, according to how these cases typically proceed, as explained by experts. As investigators dug deeper into the evidence available to them, according to reports, they began focusing on specific questions that could narrow the suspect pool. Who had the kind of detailed knowledge of the residents that would allow someone to disable or avoid cameras, as investigators considered according to sources? Who knew about Nancy Guthrie's daily routines and vulnerabilities, according to investigative analysis? Who understood the security system well enough to operate inside the home for 41 minutes without triggering responses, as law enforcement sought to determine? These questions pointed toward individuals with access, according to investigative theories reported by media. Contractors who had recently worked on the property became subjects of interest, as authorities confirmed they were interviewing service providers. A neighbor noted publicly in media interviews that Nancy's roof appeared to have been recently recoated. The roof looked unusually clean compared to other homes in the area, which had accumulated dirt from recent rain, according to the neighbor's observations. That neighbor, Laura Gargano, specifically suggested to investigators in statements to CNN that they check on contractors who had done work before the disappearance. Day workers who spend time at a property, who see the interior layout, who observe routines and security measures, who develop familiarity with the residents, fit the profile of someone who could plan and execute an operation like this, according to investigative analysis reported by experts. But contractors were not the only focus, according to law enforcement sources. Investigators also looked at delivery drivers, service providers, anyone who had regular or recent access to the property, as authorities confirmed they were conducting interviews. The theory that emerged was one of familiarity breeding opportunity, according to investigative analysis. Someone who had seen Nancy Guthrie's home, her lifestyle, her routines, as investigators theorized. Someone who perhaps knew about her connection to Savannah Guthrie and made assumptions about wealth and resources, according to analysis. Someone who might have developed resentment or motive through observation and proximity, as behavioral experts explained to media. This psychological element, the concept of coveting what one sees regularly, became part of investigative thinking according to reports. Not speculation for its own sake, but as a framework for understanding motive, as law enforcement sources explained. When someone has repeated access to another person's life, seeing their possessions, their comfort, their connections, psychological mechanisms can create justification for criminal action, according to behavioral analysis experts. Jealousy, envy, a sense of unfairness about disparities in wealth or status. These are documented motivations in cases where victims are targeted by individuals from their social periphery, as criminologists have explained in media interviews. The timing of the disappearance added another dimension, according to investigative analysis. Nancy was taken just as Savannah Guthrie was scheduled to leave the country to cover the Winter Olympics for NBC, as news reports documented. That timing seemed too precise to be coincidental, according to investigative theories. Someone who knew about Savannah's travel schedule would also likely know that Nancy might be alone, that immediate family response might be delayed, that a window of opportunity existed, as investigators considered according to sources. This suggested someone with insider knowledge, according to law enforcement analysis. Not necessarily close family, but someone in the circle of people who would have access to information about schedules, travel plans, and household routines, as investigators theorized. Investigators considered these timing elements carefully when building theories about who could have planned the operation, according to reports from law enforcement sources. As days passed without resolution, according to news reports, law enforcement expanded their search efforts while simultaneously pursuing the criminal investigation. Search teams focused on specific locations based on investigative leads, as authorities confirmed. One search that drew significant media attention involved examination of areas on Nancy Guthrie's property, according to news coverage. Investigators conducted a thorough search of locations that required specialized equipment and expertise, as reporters observed. The decision to search certain areas indicated the direction investigators' thinking had taken, according to analysis by law enforcement experts. They were not searching for locations where a living person might be hidden, as became apparent from the nature of the search. They were searching comprehensively for any evidence that might be relevant to the investigation, according to what authorities told media. This approach was consistent with the Criminal Investigation Unit's involvement and with the overall trajectory of the case, according to reports. Sheriff Nanos continued to provide updates, though those updates became increasingly measured as the investigation progressed, according to media coverage. At one point, the Pima County Sheriff's Department released a public statement that was notable for what it did not say, as news outlets reported. The statement confirmed that the investigation was ongoing. It noted that follow-up was continuing at multiple locations, and then it delivered the critical information. According to the official release, no suspects had been identified. No persons of interest had been named. No vehicles had been identified as connected to the case, as the Sheriff's Department stated publicly. This statement, more than a week after Nancy's disappearance, was remarkable according to media analysis. In a case where someone was inside the residence for 41 minutes according to digital evidence, where security cameras captured activity as authorities confirmed, where investigators had access to digital evidence and forensic material, law enforcement still had not publicly identified even a person of interest according to official statements. This suggested one of two possibilities, as law enforcement experts explained to media. Either the evidence was so ambiguous that no clear suspect had emerged, or investigators had theories and possible suspects but lacked sufficient evidence to make those suspicions public without jeopardizing the investigation, according to standard investigative procedures as experts described. The family's response added emotional weight to a case that was already generating national attention, according to news coverage. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released video statements pleading for their mother's return, as media documented. The anguish was visible and genuine, according to those who viewed the statements. Savannah spoke about nightmares, about her mind feeling haunted by what might be happening to her mother, as she stated in the video released to media. The family's pain was real regardless of what investigative theories were being pursued behind the scenes, as observers noted. But investigators had to separate emotion from evidence, as law enforcement procedures require. They had to follow where the facts led, even when that meant considering possibilities that were deeply disturbing, according to how these investigations proceed. The statements from family members were reviewed not just for their emotional content, but for any information they might provide about timelines, relationships, or knowledge of potential threats, as is standard procedure according to experts. This is standard procedure in any major case, as law enforcement has explained. Everyone close to a victim must be considered as potential witnesses and, depending on circumstances, as potential subjects of investigation until evidence definitively points elsewhere, according to investigative protocols. As investigators continued their work, according to reports, they faced the challenge that defines many complex cases. Physical evidence was limited, as authorities acknowledged. Nancy Guthrie had been removed from her home, according to what investigators determined. The scene had been processed, but whoever was responsible had been careful enough or knowledgeable enough to avoid leaving obvious identifying evidence, as law enforcement sources told reporters. Digital evidence from security systems provided timeline information but not clear identification, according to investigative analysis. Witness statements from neighbors and associates provided context but no definitive leads, as authorities confirmed. The ransom communications, rather than providing a clear path to suspects, raised more questions than they answered, according to law enforcement sources. And as time passed, the likelihood of recovering Nancy alive diminished, while the probability that investigators were dealing with the most serious outcome increased, as became apparent from official statements. The public nature of the case, driven in part by Savannah Guthrie's prominence, created both advantages and challenges for the investigation, according to media analysts. Media attention kept the case in the public consciousness, which can generate tips and keep pressure on anyone involved, as law enforcement experts have explained. But it also meant that investigators had to be extraordinarily careful about what information they released. As Sheriff Nanos stated in press conferences, details that might seem insignificant to the public could be critical to the investigation, according to law enforcement procedures. Facts that investigators wanted to keep confidential to verify suspect statements or protect investigative methods had to be guarded carefully, as authorities explained. Sheriff Nanos walked this line in his public statements, providing enough information to keep the public informed and engaged while protecting the integrity of the ongoing criminal investigation, according to media coverage of his press conferences. Theories about what happened to Nancy Guthrie centered on several possibilities, each supported by different elements of the available evidence, according to investigative analysis reported by news outlets. One theory held that this was indeed a kidnapping that went wrong, as some investigators considered. Someone targeted Nancy for ransom, underestimated the complexity of executing a successful kidnapping, made mistakes in the ransom process, and when complications arose, the situation escalated in ways that led to the current criminal investigation, according to this theory as reported. This theory explained the ransom notes and initial communication, but required explaining why medications were left behind and why the ransom process became so irregular, according to analysis. A second theory suggested this was never truly about ransom, as other investigators theorized according to sources. The kidnapping was staged to misdirect the investigation, according to this line of thinking. What happened to Nancy occurred for personal reasons, financial motives unrelated to ransom, or as part of a targeted attack motivated by resentment or psychological factors, according to this theory reported by sources. The ransom element was added to create the appearance of a random crime when it was actually planned and personal, as this theory suggested. This theory better explained the familiarity with the home, the timing, and the inconsistencies in the ransom process, according to investigative analysis. A third theory, less developed but still considered, involved the possibility that someone close to Nancy, whether family or close associate, was involved either directly or through hiring others, as some theories suggested according to reports. This would explain the insider knowledge while potentially accounting for staging elements designed to point suspicion away from those with the closest connections. According to this line of investigation, investigators worked methodically through each theory, testing them against available evidence, as law enforcement sources confirmed. They interviewed contractors and service providers who had access to the property, according to official statements. They reviewed financial records looking for unusual transactions or motive related to money, as standard investigative procedure requires. They examined Nancy's personal relationships, social connections, and any conflicts or tensions that might have created motive, according to what investigators told reporters. They analyzed communication patterns, travel records, and digital footprints of anyone in Nancy's circle, as authorities confirmed. And they continued searching, both for Nancy herself and for any physical evidence that might break the case open, according to reports. The work was painstaking and often frustrating, as law enforcement sources described. Leads that seemed promising would reach dead ends according to investigative updates. Evidence that appeared significant would prove ambiguous upon closer examination, as authorities acknowledged. And as days turned into weeks, the emotional toll on investigators grew alongside the family's anguish, according to those close to the investigation. The involvement of the Criminal Investigation Unit shaped how evidence was prioritized and processed, according to law enforcement experts. Forensic analysis of materials collected from the residence focused on identifying DNA, fingerprints, or trace evidence that might point to who was inside the home during those 41 minutes, as standard procedure dictates. Digital forensics experts examined security system data, looking for any recoverable information, even from cameras that were reportedly inoperable. According to investigative sources, communication specialists analyzed the ransom messages for linguistic patterns, technical details, or metadata that might provide leads, as is standard in these cases. And behavioral analysts reviewed the entire sequence of events, looking for psychological signatures that might narrow the suspect profile, according to how these investigations proceed. All of this work proceeded out of public view, following investigative protocols designed to build a case that could withstand legal scrutiny if and when suspects were identified and charged, as law enforcement procedures require. The decision by Sheriff Nanos to involve specialized criminal investigators early proved prescient as the investigation progressed, according to media analysis. The skills and resources that these units bring, the experience in dealing with complex criminal cases and determining who is responsible, became central to the investigation, as became apparent. Search and rescue efforts continued, but the focus increasingly shifted toward comprehensive evidence collection and criminal prosecution preparation, according to how the case evolved. The questions evolved from where is Nancy Guthrie to what happened to Nancy Guthrie and who is responsible, as investigative priorities shifted. Those are fundamentally different investigative questions requiring different methodologies and different types of evidence, as experts have explained. The specialized investigation team was equipped to pursue those questions in ways that standard missing persons investigations are not, according to law enforcement sources. As the case continued without resolution, according to ongoing media coverage, investigators faced public pressure to provide answers. The Sheriff's Department held press conferences when significant developments occurred, but the frequency of those briefings decreased as the investigation moved into more sensitive phases, as news reports documented. The public statement that no suspects or persons of interest had been identified remained accurate from a legal and investigative standpoint, according to official releases, but it did not mean that investigators lacked theories or areas of focus, as law enforcement sources explained. It meant that no one had been identified with sufficient evidence to make that designation publicly, according to legal standards. This is a critical distinction in law enforcement communication, as experts have noted. Naming someone as a person of interest or suspect carries legal and ethical weight, as attorneys have explained. It can affect their rights, their reputation, and the investigation itself, according to legal analysis. Law enforcement must have substantial basis before taking that step, as procedures require. The absence of public identification does not equal absence of investigative attention, as law enforcement sources emphasized to media. The community response to Nancy's disappearance reflected the national attention the case received, according to news coverage. Neighbors were interviewed repeatedly, as reporters documented. Some provided observations about activity around the property in the days and weeks before Nancy disappeared, as they told investigators. Others noted changes they had observed, like the roof work that neighbor Laura Gargano mentioned in media interviews. These seemingly small details, accumulated across multiple witness statements, helped investigators build a picture of who had access to the property and when, according to law enforcement sources. But they did not provide the breakthrough that would identify a specific suspect or location, as became apparent from investigative updates. The investigation required patience and persistence, qualities that are essential in complex cases, but frustrating for families and the public waiting for answers, as experts have noted. Throughout the investigation, according to analysis, one question remained central to understanding motive and planning: why Nancy Guthrie, as investigators sought to determine. If this was a targeted crime, what made her the specific victim, as law enforcement tried to understand? Her connection to Savannah Guthrie meant assumptions about wealth and resources might exist, according to investigative theories. But those assumptions would be based on perception, rather than necessarily reflecting Nancy's actual financial situation, as analysts noted. The targeting could be based on resentment towards Savannah herself, with Nancy becoming a surrogate victim, according to one theory. It could be based on observations of Nancy's lifestyle and routines by someone who developed motive through proximity, as another theory suggested. Or it could be based on specific knowledge about finances, assets, or vulnerabilities that created opportunity in the mind of whoever planned this, according to investigative analysis. Understanding victimology, why this person at this time in this way, often provides crucial insights into who might be responsible, as criminologists have explained. Investigators work to understand Nancy's life comprehensively, looking for anything that might explain why she became a target, according to law enforcement sources. The medical aspect continued to haunt the investigation, according to reports. Nancy's medications remained a critical factor, as Sheriff Nanos stated publicly. If she was alive somewhere without her daily medications, her health would deteriorate, as medical experts explained to media. The longer she went without treatment, the more serious the medical consequences became, according to medical analysis. This created a timeline pressure that many criminal cases normally do not have, as law enforcement sources noted. If Nancy was being held alive, each day without medication made her condition more precarious, as doctors explained. If something had already happened to her, then the medications left behind became evidence of intent rather than oversight, according to investigative theories. Either interpretation supported the decision to involve specialized criminal investigators, as became apparent. Either scenario suggested someone who understood what leaving medications behind would mean, according to analysis, and that understanding pointed toward deliberation and planning rather than impulsive action, as investigators considered. As investigators reviewed the 41-minute timeline repeatedly, according to sources, they considered what could be accomplished in that period. Confronting Nancy, subduing her if necessary, searching the residence for valuables or specific items, staging elements of a kidnapping scenario, preparing to transport Nancy from the property, as the theory went. All of this was theoretically possible within 41 minutes if someone knew the layout, had planned their actions, and worked efficiently, according to investigative analysis. But it was not consistent with panicked, rushed behavior, as experts noted. It was consistent with someone working methodically through a predetermined plan, according to behavioral analysis. This supported the theory of familiarity and planning, as investigators considered. Someone who had thought through what they needed to do and executed it with enough confidence to spend nearly 3/4 of an hour inside the residence, according to this line of thinking. The security camera evidence, both what it captured and what it failed to capture, became a point of intense investigative focus, according to law enforcement sources. Digital forensic specialists worked to extract every possible piece of information from the systems, as standard procedure dictates. Timestamps were analyzed to create precise timelines, according to investigative reports. Any recoverable video or image data was enhanced using sophisticated software, as forensic experts do in these cases. Metadata was examined for technical details that might provide leads, according to digital forensics procedures. And the cameras that were inoperable were analyzed to determine whether their failure was mechanical, deliberate sabotage, or the result of system knowledge that allowed someone to disable them remotely or through direct access, as investigators sought to determine. The answers to these technical questions could significantly narrow the suspect pool by identifying who would have the knowledge and capability to manipulate the security systems, according to investigative analysis. The investigation also examined financial records, looking for any transactions or patterns that might be relevant, as law enforcement sources confirmed. Nancy's accounts were reviewed according to standard procedures. Savannah's were examined to the extent that legal authority allowed, as investigators worked within legal bounds, looking for unusual activity, large withdrawals, payments to suspicious entities, anything that might connect to a ransom payment or provide motive, as is standard in these investigations. Financial analysis in kidnapping cases often reveals crucial information about planning, communication, and suspects, as experts have explained. But according to public information available, no financial smoking gun emerged from this analysis. Whatever motivated Nancy's disappearance, it did not leave obvious traces in banking records or financial transactions that investigators could identify and pursue, according to what law enforcement told reporters. Law enforcement continued to appeal for public assistance as authorities confirmed in statements. Tips were received and followed up on, according to investigative updates. Some provided useful context as law enforcement acknowledged. Others led nowhere, according to sources. A few required significant investigative resources to run down before being eliminated, as is common in these cases. This is standard in high-profile cases, as experts have noted. The public wants to help. People report things they have seen or heard. Some of it is valuable. Much of it is not, as law enforcement sources explained. Investigators must evaluate each piece of information, determine its credibility and relevance, and allocate resources accordingly, according to investigative procedures. The process is time-consuming but necessary, as authorities noted. Cases have been broken by tips from the public, as history shows. Investigators could not afford to dismiss any potential lead even when the volume of information became overwhelming, according to law enforcement philosophy. The question of why specialized criminal investigators were called in so early remained the most significant decision in shaping the investigation's trajectory, according to analysis. Sheriff Nanos had seen something in the evidence, in the circumstances, in the way the case was unfolding that convinced him this was not a standard missing person or kidnapping case, as he explained in public statements. That professional judgment, based on decades of law enforcement experience and informed by detailed briefings from investigators on the scene, carried substantial weight, according to those who know him. His decision to be transparent about involving the Criminal Investigation Unit sent a message to whoever was responsible. As analysts noted, law enforcement was not treating this as a simple kidnapping, as became clear from official statements. They were investigating it as something more serious, as authorities confirmed. That knowledge might apply pressure. It might cause mistakes. It might lead someone involved to do something that would provide investigators with the break they needed, according to investigative strategy. As the investigation continued, according to ongoing coverage, the family endured an agonizing wait. No closure, no answers, just the terrible uncertainty of not knowing what happened to Nancy, or where she might be, as family members expressed in statements. Savannah Guthrie balanced her professional responsibilities with the personal crisis, appearing on television while dealing privately with fear and grief, as was visible to viewers. The siblings supported each other while maintaining hope that their mother might still be found alive, even as time made that hope increasingly difficult to sustain, according to those close to the family. The emotional reality for the family existed separately from the investigative reality, as observers noted. They wanted their mother back. Investigators wanted to determine what happened and hold someone accountable, according to their respective priorities. Both goals were important, but they required different approaches and led to different actions, as became apparent. The case remained open and active, according to official statements. Investigators continued following leads, processing evidence, and building their understanding of what happened and who might be responsible, as law enforcement confirmed. The decision to involve specialized criminal investigators early ensured that evidence was preserved and processed with the standards required for eventual prosecution, according to legal experts. Search efforts continued in targeted areas based on investigative theories and analysis, as authorities stated, and Sheriff Nanos maintained his commitment to providing updates when significant developments occurred, while protecting the details that needed to remain confidential for investigative purposes, as he told media. The investigation of what happened to Nancy Guthrie represented law enforcement working methodically through a complex case where initial appearances did not match underlying evidence, according to analysis of how the case developed. Where a ransom note existed but behavior suggested something more complicated, as investigators determined. Where 41 minutes inside a residence told a story that contradicted the narrative of a random abduction, according to digital evidence. And where the decision to call in specialized criminal investigation teams reflected professional judgment that, whatever this case was, it needed to be investigated with the most comprehensive resources available, as Sheriff Nanos explained. That judgment shaped everything that followed and positioned investigators to pursue justice for Nancy Guthrie, however long that pursuit might take, and wherever the evidence might ultimately lead, according to law enforcement's stated commitment. The 41 minutes would remain central to understanding what happened, as investigators repeatedly emphasized. The medications left behind would continue to raise questions about intent and planning, according to investigative analysis. And the decision by Sheriff Nanos to involve his most experienced criminal investigators from the beginning would prove to be the foundation upon which the entire investigation was built, ensuring that when answers eventually came, they would be supported by evidence collected and analyzed according to the highest investigative standards as law enforcement procedures require.